We're joined today by Indiana Senator David Long from Fort Wayne, Indiana, who is the President Pro Tem of the Indiana Senate. Senator Long, thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
Tell us what Article 5 of the Constitution is and what it means and why you think it has never been used before to enact an amendment to the Constitution.
Sure. Well, Article 5 is the process by which the Constitution is amended, and there are two ways to do it. And the traditional way we're all familiar with is a congressional-driven amendment, which essentially requires 2/3 of both the House and the Senate to pass it, and then it goes to the states and must be ratified by 38 states. And if that happens, it becomes part of the Constitution. It's the way we ended slavery. It's the way we began and ended prohibition. It's the way that women got the right to vote. You know, we all are familiar with that process. But there's a second way, and it's the state-driven process, which really was inserted at the push of James Madison and Mason and others who felt strongly that without that provision and power of the states to utilize, that the federal government, the central government, might be out of control, might usurp its limitations that were intended to be placed upon it, and that the states' rights could be trampled. Kind of, visionary, I would say, considering what we see today. But interestingly enough, in fact, the fact is historically that had this not been placed into the Constitution, it would not have been ratified. The founders felt that strongly about it, that it needed to be in there to protect states' rights. That was a condition, and it tipped the scales and tipped the balance, and the Constitution was ratified. It's never been utilized, and the reason is varied. I mean, there have been efforts to amend the Constitution by the states. It's never gotten to the threshold of what's required, which is that 34 states must call for an amendment, and if they do, then it goes to Congress to call for, not to approve, but just to call for a state-driven convention. Congress was used by the founders almost as a post office box. You had to send the petition somewhere. They would be the recipient. If 34 states requested an amendment to the Constitution, a convention's called. The convention's held, the states meet. Out of that, hopefully a process is created where you have an amendment proposed, and then 38 states must then ratify again. Same process, just different way of going about it. Never been used in 227 years, since 1787. And there are a lot of reasons for it. The modern reason for it is because people are afraid of a runaway convention. And so they fear that if you created this, that there would be no way to control it, and that we might rewrite the Constitution, et cetera. And so groups like the Eagle Forum are against this, and others like the John Birch Society on the right. People on the left are opposed for it for various reasons as well. And so I'm involved in a group of state legislators which has sort of banded together. We look at the country today, we think Congress is broken. It cannot fix itself. It cannot fix the things that scare us the most. In my case, just the serious amount of debt that's being accumulated right now, which I really believe is going to potentially sink this country. No generation in the history of this country has dumped debt like this upon its children and grandchildren, but we're doing it. And there are many people, various reasons why they're interested in a convention, but I'd say the majority of people that I'm involved with are concerned about that. But we also recognize that there's a legitimate concern about the process, because the Constitution doesn't tell you how to do this. There's no blueprint in there telling you this is how you will put the convention together. These are the rules and the process. I think there's a reason for that, and that is because historically you look at the founders, they were all involved in state conventions multiple times. They were very common. Everybody knew how these things worked, and they expected us to use this routinely. And if you tell the founders today, if they were to have the opportunity to wake up and say what's going on, and we said we've never used this process, they would be shocked and profoundly disappointed in us, because they felt strongly this was the way the states could stand up to the federal government and protect their sovereignty. So we are involved in trying to put a process together that ensures the states are in charge, that there's a set of rules in place that controls that process, that people can have confidence in, that if you do have a convention, that it will be controlled, it will be limited to the subject matter that's proposed by the states, and it will not be a runaway convention. So I'm involved in that group right now, and we've met twice, once in Mount Vernon last December, in December of 2013. We met again in June 2014 in Indianapolis, where for the first time in 227 years, delegates from, in this case, 33 states got together and started discussing how we go about doing this. And it was bipartisan, and we're trying to keep it that way. We think that's very important. We have red and blue state involvement. We're going to meet again, it looks like, in Washington in December 2014, and then somewhere, possibly Utah, Salt Lake City in 2015, to finalize this and put ourselves in position to consider amendments to the Constitution from the states at that time.
Now you have you need 34
You need 34 states.
Where do you, what's the scoreboard say at this point from?
Well, it's interesting. There are we're in the process of accumulating the various petitions from states through the years that have called for various amendments to the Constitution. If you don't qualify it and say it expires within a certain period of time, it's still alive. And so what we're going to find out is exactly which amendments proposals are out there, how many of them have not expired, and do they then, in our judgment, qualify for a call. And it may be closer than people think. The balanced budget amendment is the one that seems to have the most momentum, but our group is not involved in picking a winner or a loser or a particular issue. It's just that one seems to have the most momentum nationally right now. And we'll be finding out exactly where that score is soon. We're in the process. In fact, one of our committees that we've broken into, we have about 4 of them, has recently contacted Indiana and asked my legal staff to provide them with that information, and we're getting it for them right now. We're doing that through all 50 states. We'll have that information within probably 30 days.
You mentioned the bipartisan nature. It was, the first couple of meetings were fairly overwhelmingly Republican legislators. Is there a process, or is there an outreach from the group to try to bring in more blue state Democrats?
There is, and we're actively doing that. We have some Democrats involved with our co-chairman of committees and our executive committee, who are trying to ease the concerns of some of the blue state leaders, legislative leaders, who feel that this might be a right-wing group or a group that might be trying to undo things that the Democrat Party might be interested in. And in reality, this is a states' rights issue, and states' rights and state sovereignty should not be a partisan issue. I think we all agree, whether Republican or Democrat, that the states' rights have been trampled, that they are not being respected anymore, either by the courts or Congress. And through a series of legal rulings from the Supreme Court, and through a series of acts by Congress, the 10th Amendment has almost been eviscerated. And the 10th Amendment said all things not provided directly to the federal government by the Constitution are reserved to the states. You can't recognize that anymore. It's getting to the point where states' rights almost are non-existent when it comes to the federal government, and that's not a good thing, whether you're Republican or Democrat. So we feel if we can keep that message there and try to focus the discussion on this, let's just put this process together so that we can have confidence that if this were to happen, it would be run properly, controlled by the states and not by the Congress, and that we'd have confidence that it would not be a runaway convention. That's a good message, and it is resonating, and so we're beginning to get more interest from the blue state leaders. We have some, and we do have Democrats involved in the process and in our leadership, so we're reaching out.
How difficult is the process of coming up with a process, with a framework? I mean, do you sense that there is general agreement that this is, we need to do X and Y and Z, and this is the framework we have to have, or is that?
Well, there's some basic things. There have been some scholars, both left and right, on this issue that have done some good work. The person I'm most familiar with is a more conservative scholar named Rob Nadelson from Colorado, who's done a great deal of work studying the historic processes that these conventions utilized, and one vote, one state. What does that really mean? Do you have several delegates but only ultimately one vote, per state? How's that going to work? That's one of the issues, between the states right now. How do we, do you follow the U.S. Senate type rule where you have equal representation or not? And we're going to have to work through that. There's no question. But there are some blueprints out there for us that we're following. We also have websites for our members who are providing information on our Rules Committee, for instance. It's almost a blog right now. This is what I think on these 6 questions. And we're open, it's both Republicans and Democrats providing their thoughts, which are going to be accumulated, put into a final set of proposals, voted on by the committee, and presented then to the body at large when we get together in December. And that's how we're going to go about this, in a bipartisan, very transparent and very inclusive way, so that, again, we can say everyone's been involved in it and we have some consensus on how to do this.
Seeing what you've seen through this process, is there a realistic time frame when you think that this group may bring a proposed amendment to the Congress and it could wind up on the ballots?
This group may never be the one that proposes an amendment. This group is going to put the structure together that we hope a strong majority of the states will support and say, if we're going to have a convention, this is how it's going to be run. And we say these are the rules and this is what we stand behind. And I think our congressional delegations will support that in Washington. When your state says this is the way it's going to be run and the states are going to remain in control, that's the way it's going to be. There may be some in Washington who say, well, if they're going to do that, we're taking charge of it. This is a state-driven process and it must be run by the states. So, we'll see where it all heads. But I'm confident that we have good people in place on both sides of the aisle who honestly believe in states' rights and feel that there are problems in this country that need to be solved and that the states are in position to do it because Congress can't or won't.
Well, we're certainly going to be watching to see how this shakes down. You're right, as a state's issue, it's something that's well worth keeping our eye on. Thank you very much.
Well, that's historic, Mark. It really is, and we haven't seen anything like this before. That's why we have to be deliberate and careful. And we have to build confidence that this can be done and done effectively and in a limited fashion to maybe solve some of the problems that we all see are down there and just can't get fixed in Washington right now. And if you care about your country, and we all do, then it's worth trying. And it's worth saying, we can do this. Our generation can step up, as the founders thought we should have been doing a long time ago, and step up to the plate and do something that may be a game-changing, positive thing for the nation. We're hoping so. Okay.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you.